The United States are pushing Russia out of its, I don't know, Mecca. That's oil and natural gas, because it convinced everyone, literally everyone. Let's remember how Europe at first also reacted with caution. Would it be able to manage without Russian gas? Turns out everyone managed just fine. And that was also a bit of a stand-up, so to speak. But there's more to it. China. So what kind of Russia is beneficial for China? Is it beneficial for Russia to fall apart? Or will China, keep Russia on a drip until the very end so that Russia keeps fighting and China gets its perks from a whole Russia, not a fragmented one? Well,
Most likely the latter. Look, Tala, what does it mean for Russia to collapse? That's not very good for China. Just imagine for a moment that you are a country, and to your north there lies a vast and sprawling territory of total anarchy and widespread banditry. That's actually an unpleasant situation, you know? On the other hand, of course, China would probably bring some territories under its control if Russia starts to fall apart. That's obvious. They'll help some and not others. I really do believe that Russia could break up into several states. And the states that would be in the eastern regions would probably receive help from China, so that there wouldn't be any banditry or excessive threats to China's territory. Everyone is afraid of this, and China will provide assistance. But overall, China doesn't need a wealthy Russia. And I would even say that the affection is becoming less and less mutual, to put it delicately. Just take a look at a very interesting topic. China is starting to reduce its purchases of Russian raw materials. And China has significantly reduced its exports to Russia. They've even cut back on exports, so it seems like China doesn't really have the desire to save Russia, does it? At any cost, to hold on at any cost, to bail out at any cost. It seems to me that the level of support is even less than what North Korea gets. Take North Korea, for example. It's constantly living on handouts, as you said. Otherwise, it would have collapsed long ago. But that's understandable. China helps them, China supports them, and probably gives them a lot of money. But China doesn't give Russia anything. In 4 years of war, there hasn't been a single intergovernmental loan, and there have been no free deliveries of equipment. So Russia pays for all of this? Of course, of course. They buy 3 million drone engines from China a year, but they pay for them. So there's no real friendship. It's purely business, nothing more. China doesn't invest in Russia, doesn't build any major enterprises. Putin is constantly begging Xi to build factories, but the Chinese politely smile and don't build anything. The Chinese are withdrawing capital from Chinese banks operating in Russia. This is because there are no promising prospects for conducting business operations in Russia. For this reason, China deals with Russia on a residual basis as a secondary priority.
all right. When will Russia fall apart? In our conversation, we've come to understand that this is inevitable. If everything is analytically correct. So I'm curious, into what parts, into what states will it split? And after all, Russia does indeed possess nuclear weapons.
Well, look, Thailand, I'm not saying it's inevitable. I'm saying it's possible. All right, and the second option is also terrible. The country could be turned into a concentration camp. And then there won't be any collapse. I can't rule out that the country will be turned into a concentration camp with two modes of existence, a soft one and a harsh one. In the soft mode, it seems like you're free, but you only work for the state, receive a meager state salary, shop for goods in state-run retail stores at low state prices, stand in line for 2 hours in the cold for meat, but overall, you don't rebel because the only hand that feeds you is the state. That's North Korea. So this scenario is also quite possible. In that case, Russia won't fall apart. But there is a scenario of collapse, and in my opinion, it's quite understandable. It simply follows from the geographical map. If you take a close look at the geographical map of Russia, you will clearly see that almost everything, roughly speaking, located to the east of Astrakhan, consists of territories that have direct access to the world, effectively bypassing the city of Moscow and bypassing Western Europe. They access the world through Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and through China. In other words, they can basically exist without Moscow. And that's why everything referred to as the Eastern Volga are zones that could potentially separate. As for where the border will actually run, of course, I can't say. That will all be determined in practice. But to me, it's clear that there could be, at the very least, 3 such states in this eastern part. There's the Transvolga-Ural Republic, then the Siberian Republic. Maybe it will split into 2 parts, but most likely there will be a single Siberian Republic and the Far Eastern Republic. Let me remind you that the Far Eastern Republic was actually an entity that existed during the historical period of the Civil War. As for the Siberian Republic, there were attempts to establish it during Yeltsin's time. There was a kind of movement for a Ural Republic, so there were even some early beginnings of that there. But now these ideas might resurface again if Moscow stops providing money. And the region is already in trouble now. The overwhelming majority of Russian regions have deficit budgets. And here's the situation. Look, if the federal budget is in deficit, it just prints money. But the regional budget can't print money. The money comes from Moscow. And the people there are beating up mayors and governors. At one of the rallies, there was a really striking moment. I honestly felt happy. It amused me. People came to riot at the governor's administration building and they hung the governor from a tree. Or the governor. It was a cardboard figure with a photo of the governor's face glued on, but the people were already hinting that this is exactly the kind of thing they're openly discussing now. That's why the regional administration is in a much tougher position than Moscow. The protesters won't make it to Moscow, but they can reach the governor's administration. And do you know how this will end? We're seeing it right now in Iran. So it's clear that when this kind of situation arises, there's a strong feeling that all our troubles are because of Moscow. It takes all the money and gives nothing back. We're in trouble, and their trouble is really serious. Well, I'm trying to explain to people how to prove that the regions are in trouble. Let's take a simple example. Here's a good territory. Bashkiria, the Republic of Bashkortostan. The main asset of Bashkiria is Bashneft. And at one time, it was arranged so that a fairly significant share of Bashneft's stock belonged to the government of Bashkiria. In other words, this is the wealth of the Bashkir people. The oil is on their territory, and this oil is, in a way, controlled by the people. Now, Bashneft, the part that belongs to the government of Bashkiria, is being sold. The shares are being sold because Bashkiria has a terrible budget deficit, and there's nowhere else to get money. And so the national asset, the shares of Bashneft, is being sold off because there's simply no other option.